Today we're actually going to talk about more how to grow figs outside, mainly just outside, but we'll touch on the other types of figs as well when we get into it. And if anybody has any questions, they can just jump in, type the chat in. I don't know if you all want to wait to the end. We can do that. It's up to you all how you do that. First off, a little history of the fig. It is Ficus carica. They did originate in northern Asia. A lot of us probably think of more of thinking it's a Mediterranean plant, but nope, it's actually a northern Asia plant. Sumerian stone tablets actually record the usage of figs back to 2500 BC. And there's actually even remnants have been found in excavations as far back as 5000 BC. So this has been a fruit crop that goes way back in human history for several reasons. That one of the main reasons is it's sweet, has a lot of calories, and it stores well. The Spanish missionaries brought figs to what is now the United States in 1520, and then the Black Mission fig. So you probably have heard of that. Fig was named after a California Franciscan mission that dates back to the 1770s. So we have a long history with the fig. Other places that you've probably heard of the fig, it's mentioned prominently in the Bible. Jesus cursed the fig tree for not bearing fruit. It later withered and died. That was in Matthew 21:18. And then Jewish King Hezekiah used fig leaves to help cure an infection. And then James used the metaphor of fig leaves to show how Christians should live. And then the early church used fig leaves as covering for statues. That happened after Rome became a Christian state, and they went around and put fig leaves over all the statues. The scholars also actually believe that the forbidden fruit was actually fig rather than apple. So that's just a little bit of trivia there that you may not have known about figs, but it's been around for a food crop for us. And you can tell by it being mentioned in the Bible so prominently that it was a great food source at that time as well. Greek mythology had the fig had the blessing of sanctity of the Greek gods, and then Plato documented that figs were fed to the athletes at Olympia to increase their running speeds, which this probably was a good thing for them to be eating at this time because figs are 50% sugar. So in essence, it was kind of the candy bar or the candy of the time. So it probably was a burst of energy because you're talking about a time when the sugar was not very prominent in diets. So most of that had to come from fruits, and fig has a very high sugar content. As far as nutrition, the figs contain potassium, fiber, omega 3, 6, calcium, iron, among other things. It also contains pectin, which is actually really beneficial to our digestive systems and can even help clear cholesterol. And most of us don't get enough of some of these vitamins and minerals in our diet these days. Figs are also said to help hypertension, even boost brain function, treat anemia, help a sore throat, and help strengthen vision. But for me, I'll always say this every time I do this PowerPoint: they are 100% tasty, no matter what percent of nutrients and things that they have in them for our diets. Uh, Fig is in the family Moraceae, and down there at the bottom, you'll see there that is the mulberry family. They are distantly cousins, and you can kind of see by the leaves there that they actually are similar in shape and form. The common name of fig in English is fig in English. In Spanish, it's higo, and in French, it's figu, fig, and then in German, it's feig, and then in Italian, it's fico. Um, but you can see there again, those leaves there, they have similar shapes, and they can actually change their shape depending on whenever the leaf is coming out. There are about 470 varieties of common figs. We only have a handful or less that we can grow here. Only generally one that can consistently be planted in the ground and actually give us figs on a mostly yearly basis. Figs do have very few problems in our climate as far as, other than the cold, as far as diseases and insects, there's really not that much that really bothers them. You could think this is a warm season plant that is nowhere near native to our area. So there's not a lot of native insects and diseases that will actually bother them. Figs do need to be grown in well-drained locations with full sun. Again, they are a warm weather plant. They like it hot. Um, Figs in Kentucky are more like a small shrub than actually a tree. That's because of the cold. Um, we'll call them tree. I have seen some fig trees get 15 to 16 feet tall. I won't guarantee that you'll ever see that. You have to have them in a really ideal location for that. But in warmer climates, they can actually get over 100 feet tall. So they can grow into a quite large tree if given the proper climate. As far as site selection, they do need a protected location. Um, that's going to be the best bet for getting figs. It's an absolute must for a couple few of the cultivars that we can actually grow that might overwinter and give figs. And then the south, the west side of a building is going to be your ideal location because that's going to be the most protected from the winter winds and most of the coldest of the weather. A reduction in cold damage can also be helped by reducing the amount of direct sunlight plants get early in the morning and late in the evening. Reason being is in the wintertime, if it gets sun really early in the morning, it might be the tissue may be frozen, it heats up quick, and then when that sun goes off of it, it could drop quickly again, and you get some freeze damage that way. Kind of the same principle in the late afternoons as well. Once the sun goes down, the temperature's going to drop quickly, and you can get some freeze damage that way. So it's kind of hard to situate a plant where it's going to get full sun during the summer and maybe miss some morning and evening sun in the afternoons. But if that's possible for you, based on which way the sun moves around the sky, that would be your ideal thing to do if you can. And also, they do need 8 hours of full sun, so they do like hot full sun during the growing season. We always say probably every class that you hear from the extension agent is do a soil test, but that is the only way we're going to know exactly what you need in your soil. So do a soil test if at all possible. Um, Fig, like most of our fruit crops, do prefer a pH of around 6 to 6.5. And it can also be grown, they can grow in just about any type of soil, but they do want good drainage. They will not stand wet feet. So make sure that you don't put them in a low spot. You've got one planted in the ground outside and you've got it in a wet spot, you're going to miss it pretty quickly. It will not make it past the first winter. I can guarantee you that. Also, if you can, add lots of organic matter that will help loosen that soil. That also help hold moisture in a drought, but also help it drain if it's too wet. And it's just an all-around good thing to apply to your soil. So in Kentucky, our trees should be planted in the spring. You're usually going to either buy these as a potted plant or you're going to get them as a bare root or dormant plant. Personally, I wouldn't want to plant before May 1st. I wouldn't want to put a new plant out there and let's have a late frost or freeze on it. And May 1st, people are like, well, we're past our average frost date. Well, we had a freeze last year around, I think it was May 1st still. So just hold them back. Don't plant them yet, but we do want to plant them in the spring because we want to get these plants established before they get cold weather in the fall. A fall planting is going to have a much higher chance of failure than a spring planting. So just keep that in mind. And you can get them bare root if you order them mail order. Usually you can get them at garden centers around here, probably starting now. I've not seen them yet, but they usually show up at some of the big box stores, even at your local nurseries. Probably can carry them year round. As far as planting, you want to make sure your soil's not too wet when you plant, just like you would any other plant or tree or shrub. Do dig a large hole, larger than the root ball, because you want that soil to get loosened around that root ball as it's growing out. That way it can get out of that native soil pretty quickly. Also, do not put fertilizer in the hole. You can burn the roots by doing that, so just avoid that. You could use a water-soluble fertilizer if you'd like to water it in, but don't put any granular fertilizers down in that hole. You could if it's maybe osmocote or something slow release, but it's just the best bet not to do it as a general rule. And then also you may want to put a little bit of topsoil right in the bottom of that hole when you dig it, especially if you have some heavy clay. Just a little of that native soil there might get some of those new roots out, going out away from that root ball where they can get out into that soil that they actually need to get their roots out into it and get used to. You can see this old picture of John Strang here. I stuck that in there because it's just, he's planting a fruit tree. We're going to pretend that's fig. I think that's probably apple in his old PowerPoint, but you can see that's a pretty old picture. You want to make sure you cut off any broken roots if there's any roots sticking out. If you're planting a potted plant, you may want to make sure that if it's very pot bound, to loosen some of those outside roots up. Maybe even you may even need to cut a few of them, or even scuff them up with your hands, just to get them away from that tight root ball and get them out into the soil as they're growing. Place topsoil in around your roots after you put it in the hole. One big thing is, do not bring in good soil to fill the hole. Put the soil that was right, that you took out of it, right back in the hole. The research shows that if whenever you put really great soil back into maybe a hole that's of clay, that root ball just stays in there. It goes in circular form around there and can girdle the plant. So the plant needs to get used to the native soil. So we recommend now just to put the native soil back into the hole. You want to firm the soil around the plant, just like you would any other tree or shrub, and then water it good to settle your soil around your roots. Make sure that way you get any air bubbles or anything like that out of it. If you're planting a bare root plant, make sure that you hold that plant up, spread those roots out, and add some soil at a time to make sure you're not mashing all those roots down at the bottom of that hole. You want them to be spread evenly into that soil. Pruning, these are not we don't prune these plants like we would, say, apples and pears and things that we consider actually fruit trees. But for these, we want to prune to form a bush. And usually after the first season, we want to prune back to about a third of the plant. Even if it didn't winter kill, you want to go ahead and prune back a third that following spring or late winter. The reason for us is this is never really going to grow into what we would call a tree. It's still going to be a shrub for us. So this will encourage side branching, and that'll give us more fruit that second and third season. Also, in warm climates, you would select leaders like a regular tree or a fruit tree like we would for, say, an apple. But for us, that's just not going to be an option. There's very little pruning required here in Kentucky other than basically pruning out the dead or damaged, cold damaged wood. And that's pretty much it. After that, we're going to let it grow and really push it and try to get a lot of new growth. Because remember, these plants fruit on new growth rather than old growth. But they can fruit on old growth as well, but we'll talk about that just in a minute. The sucker growth, especially if these get killed to the ground, you get a lot of sucker growth from the roots. You may need to thin those out if they get too thick. They can get pretty thick. If you get a lot of root suckers, you may want to prune some of those out and maybe thin them down some. Late spring is the best time to prune. So we're looking at maybe whenever you first see the buds breaking on the plant. You want to go in and go ahead and do some pruning then if you need to. What I like to do is usually wait and see where it died back to, and then prune it back to that. I don't like to do much harder pruning than that on a mature plant unless it maybe it is in a spot that's really great and it gets a little too tall. You can always prune it back like that. Also, you want to make all your cuts back to a bud or branch. That's going to allow it for a quicker cut healing. Again, most of our stuff is going to die back at least a little further than what we would like for it to, so that the cut healing is not as huge a deal as it would be for a plant that's going to grow into maybe a large plant like they would down south. Figs will grow in poor soil, but they do prefer rich or rich-ish soil. So go ahead and add a lot of that loamy organic matter into your soils. If you don't have it, add it to it. Again, we're trying to push these plants to push out a lot of new growth each spring to enhance the amount of figs that we're going to get. Also, you want to go ahead and mulch your plants. That's going to keep competition from weeds down. It's also going to conserve your moisture. If we have a hot, dry spell, you do need to water these. These can withstand some dry weather once established, but that's going to reduce your yield and the amount of figs you're going to get. So we don't want that to happen. And just a general rule, you should get a couple of feet of growth, if not more than that in a growing season. If you're not getting that, then you definitely are not fertilizing enough and probably not watering enough either. in most summers. So I've seen some of these plants put out 5 and 6 feet of growth in one year, maybe even a little more than that. So if you're not getting a good growth rate on these, then you're definitely not fertilizing and watering enough. But definitely fertilizing. We could get plenty of rain and the plant not getting enough fertilizer and not keep up. A few guidelines, and this, should be based on your soil test, but even with the soil test, you're probably going to go ahead and recommend some of these fertilizer rates just to increase the growth on these plants. You do want to use a fertilizer. Any kind of multi-purpose fertilizer is just fine. Triple 8, triple 10, triple 19. Just if you're using triple 19, you're going to lower that rate by half, just because it's twice as much of active ingredient as the triple 10 would be. For feeding plants 1 to 2 years old, we're going to apply about an ounce of fertilizer each month from the beginning of growth through the end of July. So let's just say we're going to do that May, June, July, and then we're going to stop in August, because we have to start slowing these plants down by then, because we don't want new soft growth going into fall. And then you want to apply fertilizer to larger plants 3 times a year, usually late winter, early June, and then mid-July. And you will use about maybe 1/3 of a pound per foot of bush height per application. So you can just use your best judgment on that. Again, this is not something like that has to be completely accurate. All we're trying to do is get plenty of fertilizer on these plants and get a good, strong growth out of it. Another thing is, if your fruit are not reaching maturity or ripening properly, I know, I guess it was 2 years ago we had the drought. People called and said they had all kinds of figs on the plants, but they just weren't ripening. In their case, it was because they weren't watering. So once they started watering those plants, those figs started ripening up. So if you've got figs that are not ripening, it's a couple problems that can happen there. Either too much fertilizer or not enough water. Most of the time, it's going to be not enough water around here, because we get pretty dry sometimes in July and August and September. So these plants can withstand most of that, but they're not going to actively grow or ripen at that point. You also want to increase the amount of fertilizer as the tree grows. So you may, up to 10 pounds per year. If you're getting a large plant, you're going to have to add more fertilizer to get that plant really going. And then you can also always use a slow release fertilizer. You could also use, some manures or compost around those plants if you wanted to reduce the amount of, the granular fertilizer that you're actually applying. And you can even do organic granular fertilizers if you'd like. It's just going to take a lot more to really get the boost out of that than it would if you're using the triple 19s or triple 10s or those kinds of things. So as far as fruiting, cultivars for us fruit mainly in mid to late summer or into fall. And you will probably have green figs on your plants that's going to get frozen in the fall. That's going to happen most years for us. That's just, the nature of growing a plant that would actually prefer a much longer growing season in a much hotter or warmer climate. Figs do fruit from new growth, as I mentioned earlier. So the more new growth you get, the more figs you're going to get. So keep that in mind. And then there you can see there the hint: if killed to the ground, you can still get figs. That is absolutely the case, mainly with one particular type of fig, because it can fruit quicker. We'll talk about that just in a second. So our main crop of figs are produced on new wood, which I mentioned that's good for us, because if we do get killed to the ground, we can still get figs. That's unlike most of our fruit crops. The first fruiting on oat or the previous season's growth, if the top didn't die to the ground, they will produce figs. They generally are not going to be the big, huge figs or plump figs that you see in commercials or on TV in warmer climates. But you will still get figs. They're still okay. They're still tasty, but they're not considered the best figs like on new wood. And they're called bravas. I'm not sure why they're called that, but I'm sure if I look that up, it's probably Italian or something for not as good. But which of these you can see there, we're probably going to get in Kentucky. You're going to get that bottom picture. You're going to get much smaller fig. You're never going to get a huge fig like at the top, unless you've got a plant that's overwintering in a greenhouse or something like that. The fruit of the fig is actually a multiple fruit, and you can see there There's a Keen's inside of it. It's actually an inside out fruit when you think of it. You don't need pollination to get fruit on a fig. Actually, the fig itself is the fruit and the flower at the same time. You can see it has an ostiole or eye at the base of the fruit, and inside of there, if you ever open one up and really take a look at it, the flowers are actually inside of that. So it has to get pollinated. So it's an inside out fruit and flower. So the um, to get pollinated, they have to go into that little osteo and pollinate the plants that way. So, how do we get figs in Kentucky? Variety selection is the key to this of getting figs in Kentucky from plants that overwinter outside and stay outside in the ground. And that variety is Chicago Hardy. You'll also see it called Hardy Chicago. Doesn't matter what you want to call it, but that's the variety that we can get figs consistently off of, because this fig can actually grow from the root and give you figs during that growing season. So a little background on this. The Chicago Hardy or Hardy Chicago fig was found growing in Chicago. It actually fruited in Chicago. Someone started taking cuttings of it because that variety probably came over with an immigrant. We don't know where it came from, but it fruits on new wood and fruits quickly. So it allowed it to be able to have a crop in climates where it actually got killed to the ground. You can see there, it's not a large fig. It does produce small figs, but they are very tasty. If you like figs, you're going to love it. But you can see that there's going to take several figs if you want to make preserves or something like that with them, which I have. I've saved figs in a freezer for, a couple of weeks to get enough to make some preserves, but you can do that as well. Here's some other varieties. Usually people will grow these in containers and they bring them outdoors, or they'll store them in a protected place for the winter. Usually these are the other two main types you'll see is brown turkey there and Celeste. And if you see there, brown turkey produces about the same size fig as the Chicago Hardy, but Celeste is just a little bit bigger. But most of the time, if we get figs around here on these, it's from a plant that's potted and brought indoors. And it's usually not a very big crop or anything that we can actually harvest and make preserves or jams or whatever you want to with it. More of a fresh eating situation then. The foliage types, the different ones, are the three main ones that are grown in our area. We have brown turkey there at the top left. You can see it's a skinnier leaf. And then we have Chicago Hardy, which is more of a thicker, fatter, wider leaf. And then we have Celeste, which is kind of an in-between of the two. But you can see there on the Chicago Hardy that's planted against a wall, probably facing south. And you can see there's ripe figs on it, or almost ripe figs there. And then there's also some green ones on the stem there behind that. You want to harvest your figs when they're next wilted. If you see that right at the top right picture there, that fig that's turning brown, notice how the fig is actually drooped down. That's what we call it whenever their neck wilts. It'll actually start to hang down more than stick out like it was before. If you do pick a fig and it exudes that milky substance there or latex, just know that that fig's not quite right. Some people are allergic to that latex. If you are, you probably want to avoid picking these. I don't know about eating them, but if you pick them early like that, you can always leave those in the fridge or even on the counter for a day or so, and they will start to ripen up at least enough to really still taste pretty good. But if you're picking several figs and they're all exuding that latex, then that's telling you that they're not ripe and you need to leave them on the tree a little longer. So how do we prevent cold injury? First off, select the right cultivar. That's going to be Chicago Hardy if you're planting it in the soil outside, because that plant can die to the ground and give us figs. All three of them can live in the ground and die to the ground and then come back to the root system, but you're not going to get figs that way. So Chicago Hardy is the key to that. Plant to the south side of your building. That way you've got some protection from the coldest of the winter winds. And then also avoid late and over fertilization. That's what I talked about earlier. You want to stop by the 1st of August anyway. and that way we're not getting a lot of fresh succulent growth going into winter. I know we usually tell people to stop fertilizing things 6 weeks before frost. We want to stop way before that on our figs, that we make sure that they're not uh, putting out a lot of good or succulent growth before it gets cold. You can also mound your soil or mulch over base of a plant like the hybrid tea roses. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And then you can pull shoots to the ground and secure them and cover them with mulch as well. You can always lay branches down, maybe a few, not all of them, maybe some of the lower ones, and cover them. And that way you'll make sure they're going to overwinter easier. And then you can plant some of the Celeste and the brown turkey in a 30 to 50 gallon container, and you can move to your basement or garage for the winter and reduce your watering, less light, maybe basically just sending that plant off into dormancy and just hold it there until spring. So as far as preventing them like winter damage like we would a rose, this is the same tips we would give for a hybrid tea rose to make sure that we didn't lose that bud union and lose the top part or the actually growth that we wanted. So you can always pull the canes of the tree up together, the limbs, um, and mound a bunch of soil or straw or mulch over maybe a foot or two at the base of that plant. Uh, that covering of those stems is going to keep those stems from freezing out. You may lose the top, but you're still going to have a foot or two of stem that is going to overwinter. They're going to break early, and they'll give you some of those earlier figs that may be not as good as what's on new growth, but still it's extra figs. And around here, any fig is a good fig. Also, you can see there in the picture to the right, that's a climbing rose, and that's the way they would in really cold climates pull that whole rose down off the trellis and cover it. If you've got a smaller plant or even a larger plant with a lot of um, branches towards the bottom of the ground, you can pull those over and cover those like that as well. And you can put soil and mulch or whatever you've got to go over those. And then at the bottom, that's just the same concept as doing a mound, but they've just got a little cardboard box there that they set around the plant just to hold that. It looks like leaves, I guess they're putting on that on there from blowing away. And then even put, believe it or not, if you've got some greenery left from Christmas, you can go ahead and put that around the plants as well, because that you think, well, it's not going to keep, it's going to keep not going to keep the plant from getting cold, but it can stop some of that wind chill damage that can happen when it's really cold and the wind's blowing, and it just desiccates that tissue. Just that little bit of windbreak can actually protect some of those stems from dying out. If you want more figs, or somebody has a fig and you want one of it, there's a couple easy at-home ways to propagate these. This is layering. That's probably one of the easier ways. Not layering. This is not layering. It's the cutting. Layering is the next slide. Sorry. You can take a cutting, and you want to do this in early March. So from an older plant, you can see there we're going to take. Make sure the stem is alive. It did overwinter, and you're just going to take that section out, maybe 7 or 8 inches, and then you're going to bury it all the way down to just one bud sticking out of the soil. So you're going to do that in late March or early March, and then you're going to wait and let that root. It will root in. If we have a dry spring, which is not that common around here, but if we do, you're probably going to want to water that. But if, generally speaking, from then to the 1st of May, that plant will root. That cutting will root. They do root pretty easily, and that's just an easy way to do it if you want to do it at home. But when you do cut that, make sure you get it back into the soil pretty quickly. You can also put a little rooting hormone on it if you would like. It would not hurt a thing. If nothing else, it would help, but you don't have to. They do root pretty easily. And the other way is probably the easiest and the least trouble for us is layering. You're just going to pull one of those low branches down and bury part of it in the middle. So you've got, it's still connected to the plant. You're going to bury that stem, mound some soil over the middle of that stem, and then leave the other end out. Generally, by the time growth starts, by the following spring, that will have rooted, and then you can cut it from that main plant, and then you could either dig it, make sure you keep that soil in that root ball, or leave it until the following season and then move it. Totally up to you, but that's the easiest way to do that. And then, as you see there, it says the rooting will occur at nodes below the ground. Basically, a node is just right there where that bud would break. that's where it usually is going to root. As far as problems, there's not really much insect or disease problems on figs in Kentucky because, like I said earlier, we live in a climate where this plant is not here very much, so there's haven't built up any diseases or insect problems. The one thing that can happen is fruit splitting there, and that can happen to a lot of other plants as well. But this happens whenever the plant's gotten dry. Those figs are close to ripening, and then it gets a huge flux of rain or even water from you, and then it takes up water too quickly and it splits the fruit. So just keep that in mind. Keep them evenly watered. This is another instance where mulch does play a big part in keeping that soil even. So it doesn't get really dry and you get really wet. It stays more of an even moisture that way. Also, as far as eating them, ants and flies can enter that osteo. So, just a little tip: don't just pull the fig off the plant and just pop it in your mouth. Always open it up first to make sure ants will get in there. I've seen little flies in there, even some small wasps. So just always open it up first to make sure that you're not popping in some insects. I don't think any of them I think would hurt you, but you could get a sting or even eat something like that. And most of us don't really want to eat some insects with our figs. Birds can be a problem. I've had some people tell me that the birds were a problem for them. Personally, they never bothered them. I don't know that they just didn't find them, didn't know what they were yet. But if they do start to get into your figs, you can always use some bird netting over the plants, hang some old CDs in there, and just let them flash that way. And then there's some other things you can do, stress calls and those kinds of things. But bird netting is probably going to be your most foolproof. But if you're like me with some of the birds, you may need to lay something around the base of that netting to make sure that they can't just crawl under. I know like northern mockingbirds and some of those birds for blueberries, they will actually pick up the net, go under it, and then pick it back up, go back out. So I've had to lay things around to hold that down to make it heavier where they can't do that. Once they do find your figs, they're probably going to be smart enough to do that with them as well. So it may be something that you just need to cover the plant and hold it to the ground. Few tips here for eating fresh. Pick when fully ripe. That's going to give your best flavor always, just like the vine ripened tomato or any other ripened plant ripened strawberries or whatever. For preserving, you want to pick a couple days before fully ripe. Um, that'll reduce your damage from souring and splitting. Usually, what I would do if I knew I wanted to make some preserves or something like that, I would go ahead and pick them, rinse them off, let them dry, and just throw them into a Ziploc bag, put them in the freezer. And then once I had collected enough, then I could go ahead and make my preserves. As far as drying, you want to allow the fruits to remain on the plant until they are fully ripe, maybe even a touch overripe. They should fall into your hand when you touch them if you're wanting to dry them. And the reason this is going to be your best, this is going to have your lowest water content in the fruit. It's also going to have the highest sugar content. So when you're drying them, the more water that's already out of them before you start drying, the better. And then that's also going to have a higher sugar content. If you do want more tips on as far as preserving these or what to do with them, you can always visit the UC Food Safety there in California because they grow a lot of figs in California and they have a lot of tips and recipes there for you if you'd like to check that out. Well, guess we're open for questions now. I don't know about you all, but I could eat a fig Newton right now. It's lunchtime.